Money talks, but the rich speak another language. Chapter 1. The First Whisper of Wealth. There comes a moment in every life when money stops being just coins, bills, or numbers on a glowing screen and suddenly feels alive, as if it were speaking directly to you. Most people miss that moment, brushing it off as chance or luck. But those who listen carefully begin to notice patterns and meanings that others never hear. It is like catching the faint murmur of a foreign tongue. In a crowded room, you do not yet understand the words, but you sense there is something important being said, and your instinct tells you that learning this language could change everything. You grew up hearing common phrases about money, lines passed from parents, teachers, or neighbors as if they were eternal truths. Money doesn't grow on trees. Hard work pays off. Save for a rainy day. These sayings become the grammar of an ordinary financial life, where money is something scarce, demanding, and easily lost. Yet when you begin to notice how the wealthy move and speak about money, you realize they operate with an entirely different dictionary. To them, money is not just for saving but for multiplying, not merely for surviving but for designing the life they choose. They hear possibilities in every transaction, opportunities in every exchange, and wealth in places where others see only risk. Imagine a young man named Daniel working long hours in a small accounting office. Each month, he carefully tracks his salary, his rent, and the modest savings he manages to set aside. He believes he is being responsible, and in a sense, he is. But one day he meets an older colleague who casually mentions that his portfolio grew by $20,000 last year, not because he worked overtime, but because he positioned his money in the right place at the right time. For Daniel, it feels as though someone suddenly spoke in an unfamiliar dialect. He had always believed money grew only from hours worked, yet here was a man whose money seemed to work independently, whispering profits while he slept. This is the first whisper of wealth. The subtle invitation to rethink the relationship you have with money. It is the realization that while you may have been trained to measure worth in terms of effort and exhaustion, the rich have learned to measure it in terms of leverage, knowledge, and positioning. You begin to see that 100 hours of sweat may not equal the growth of one well-placed decision. The numbers start to look different, as if they are carrying hidden messages. Where before you saw $10,000 as a long and painful saving goal, you now begin to wonder how $10,000 could itself be the seed that grows into something larger. The whisper grows louder when you reflect on history. Think of the story of Sarah Breedlove, better known as Madam C.J. Walker, born in 1867 to formerly enslaved parents. She began life in deep poverty, working as a laundress for little more than $1 a day. Yet she noticed something others ignored: the unmet need for hair care products tailored to African American women. By listening to that whisper of opportunity, she built a company that transformed her into the first recorded female self-made millionaire in America. Her wealth did not come from obeying the common sayings about money. It came from learning to hear a different message, to translate need into enterprise, and to allow money to become a voice for her vision. As you dwell on these stories, you realize that the whisper is not just about money itself, but about perception. It is about the way you interpret the movements of cash, credit, and capital around you. Most people hear noise, a constant hum of expenses and obligations, but those attuned to the language of wealth hear music, a rhythm they can follow and even direct. The same paycheck that feels like a cage to one person can feel like a tool to another. The same market fluctuation that sparks panic in one household sparks excitement in another. The difference is not the event itself, but the vocabulary you use to understand it. Slowly, the whisper invites you to step closer. It tells you that money is not your enemy, not a master that controls your days, but a messenger, carrying instructions for how to build freedom. It is like standing at the threshold of a secret conversation. You may not yet know how to reply, but you recognize the power in simply beginning to listen. And with every attentive moment, you edge closer to fluency, in a language that has been spoken all around you but rarely translated for you. The whisper of wealth lingers in your ears long after you first hear it, and once it has reached you, silence is no longer possible. What once felt like background noise now feels urgent, like a code you are compelled to decipher. At first, it unsettles you. You begin to notice the conversations around you, the way friends complain about bills, the way coworkers joke about being broke before payday, the way family members repeat the same phrases about security. And you realize these are not neutral remarks. They are expressions of a financial language built on scarcity. It is the only language most people ever learn, and it traps them inside its grammar of limitation. But when you start to pay closer attention, you catch glimpses of another kind of conversation. The wealthy rarely speak of money as if it were vanishing, slipping through their fingers like sand. Instead, they speak as if money is a partner, an employee, even a seed. They talk of positioning rather than losing, of compounding rather than cutting, of opportunities rather than obstacles. It is as though they inhabit the same world as everyone else, but carry a different dictionary in their minds. You see this difference most clearly when you examine how people react to unexpected windfalls. Imagine two individuals, each receiving a tax refund of $3,000. The first sees it as a chance to purchase a new television, replace worn-out furniture, or take a short vacation. The money vanishes quickly, leaving behind only fleeting pleasure. The second views the same $3,000 as a small but powerful lever. Perhaps they invested in a modest index fund, and in 20 years, with compounding at a steady return, it quietly transforms into nearly $10,000. Or perhaps they use it to purchase supplies for a side business that, with persistence, generates a steady extra income of $200 each month. In that scenario, the original $3,000 becomes the seed of tens of thousands more. Both people experienced the same event, yet they spoke entirely different languages with the money they received. The whisper teaches you to ask, what story will I let this money tell? Will it narrate a tale of instant gratification and then fade into silence? Or will it grow into a chapter of empowerment that speaks for years to come? Once you begin to ask this, you cannot return to unthinking transactions. Every dollar feels like a word in a sentence, capable of changing the meaning of your financial story, depending on how you place it. Take the story of Elena, a single mother working at a hospital in the early 2000s. Her income was modest, and for years she felt trapped by the relentless rhythm of bills. Then one evening, while waiting for her bus, she overheard two nurses talking about how they had pooled their money to purchase a small rental property. The conversation stuck with her, like an echo. She realized that even on her limited income, she could begin saving towards something larger. Over the course of 3 years, setting aside just $200 each month, she built a fund of more than $7,000. With a small loan added to her savings, she purchased a tiny apartment in need of repair. She rented it out, and suddenly, she was no longer living on her paycheck alone. The whisper had grown into a voice, telling her that her labor was not the only way to build a future. That is the secret. The whisper never shouts. It does not force itself into your decisions. It waits quietly, offering you chances to notice. A discount that could become savings instead of spending. A connection that could turn into mentorship instead of idle chatter. A skill you could polish into a side venture instead of leaving it dormant. Most people ignore these opportunities, treating them as noise because they have not learned to listen. But the rich are fluent in noticing. They treat each possibility as a phrase in a larger dialogue, and they respond accordingly. As you learn to listen, you begin to develop an inner ear for money. You notice not only the numbers themselves, but the stories behind them. $10,000 in a bank account might be safety for one person, but for another, it is sleeping potential. A credit card debt of $5,000 is a weight that drowns one household, while for another it is a temporary tool used strategically and then cleared. Numbers do not speak in only one tone. They shift, depending on who is translating them. The whisper of wealth is really the beginning of translation. It is your first attempt to move beyond the surface meaning of money into its deeper layers. You are no longer satisfied with saying, I earn this, I spend this, I save this. You start to ask, what can this become? Where can this lead? How can this speak for me when I am silent? You are beginning to tune into the frequency that has always surrounded you, the quiet, persistent language of money that the rich have long understood. And once you begin to hear it clearly, it changes not only how you act, but who you are becoming. Chapter 2. Breaking Free from the Common Tongue. The language you first learn about money is not chosen by you. It is handed down like a family recipe, repeated so often that it begins to feel natural. But just because it feels natural does not mean it is nourishing. For most people, this inherited language is one of scarcity, where every conversation about money carries the same undertone. There is never enough. You hear it in jokes about living paycheck to paycheck, in complaints about bills, in warnings that investing is risky, and in the sigh of resignation when debts mount higher than hopes. This is the common tongue of money, and it holds more people captive than any law or institution ever could. Breaking free from that tongue requires a moment of confrontation. It is not simply about earning more or spending less, but about realizing that the way you have been taught to think about money is itself a cage. Consider the way most people describe their work. They say things like, "I have to put in more hours," or "If I don't grind, I don't get paid." The language itself betrays the belief that effort is the only pathway to income. But listen to how the wealthy speak, and you notice a subtle shift. They ask, "How can I position my capital?" Or, "Which system will generate revenue even while I sleep?" The difference is not only in opportunity, but in vocabulary, which shapes vision. If you can only talk about working harder, you will only imagine a future of endless labor. But if you begin to talk about leverage, compounding, and ownership, you start to see a horizon beyond your present circumstances. There is a story of a young woman named Lucia who grew up in a household where debt was considered inevitable. Her parents carried credit card balances that never seemed to shrink, and they spoke of it as though it were as natural as breathing. "Everyone owes something," her father would say. "That's just how life is." When Lucia received her first credit card at 19, she mirrored what she had seen. Within a year, she had racked up $4,000 in debt and felt the crushing anxiety that comes with it. But a turning point arrived when she took a personal finance class in college, where the instructor insisted that debt was not a law of nature but a product of choices. The professor compared it to speaking a borrowed dialect. If you constantly adopt the vocabulary of debt, your financial sentences will always describe struggle. That comparison struck Lucia deeply. She began to study how others lived without debt, shifting her language from, "I can't avoid this," to, "I choose differently." Within 3 years, she cleared her balance, built an emergency fund of $10,000, and began investing in small increments. Her life changed because she broke free from the common tongue she had inherited. What makes the common tongue so dangerous is that it disguises itself as truth. When someone tells you that only the rich can invest, or that risk is too high, or that saving is impossible, they speak with such certainty that you accept it as fact. But often these are not truths, only echoes of fear passed along through generations. In many neighborhoods, entire communities speak only this language of limitation. You hear it in corner stores, in church gatherings, at kitchen tables. It shapes what children believe long before they ever handle money themselves. To break free is to challenge not just your own beliefs, but the shared vocabulary of those around you. Imagine you are standing in a crowded train station where everyone is shouting in the same dialect. At first, it seems impossible to imagine another way of speaking. Then, from across the room, you hear someone use different words, clear, measured, filled with possibility. Your ears perk up. You realize there is more than one way to talk, more than one way to think. This is what happens when you encounter a mentor, a book, or even a conversation that challenges your assumptions about money. It feels foreign at first, even uncomfortable. But if you let yourself listen, the new language begins to reshape the way you see the world. Breaking free does not mean abandoning everything you have been taught. Some of the lessons in the common tongue, like the value of hard work or the discipline of saving, still hold meaning. But they must be translated into a richer vocabulary. Hard work alone cannot build freedom, but hard work paired with strategy can. Saving alone cannot create wealth, but saving paired with investing can. The key is to stop repeating words that describe limitation and start forming sentences that describe expansion. Only then can you move from the grammar of scarcity to the fluency of abundance. And when you do, the world itself begins to sound different. Opportunities you once dismissed as impossible now feel attainable. Choices that once felt reckless now appear as calculated risks. Conversations that once depressed you now inspire you. You are no longer bound by the vocabulary of debt and limitation. You are beginning to speak the language of wealth, even if only in broken phrases at first. And like learning any new tongue, the more you practice, the more fluent you become. Once you recognize the weight of the common tongue, it becomes impossible to ignore. Everywhere you turn, you hear its phrases echoing. I can't afford that. I'll never get ahead. It's just too risky. These words are not harmless. They are chains. They lock people into patterns where they see money as something outside of their control, something to chase or fear but never command. To break free, you must first become aware of the prison built from language, and then you must deliberately choose to speak differently, even before you fully believe the words coming from your own mouth. It often begins with a single sentence spoken in defiance. Instead of saying, I can't afford this, you start to say, how can I afford this? That small shift changes everything. The first phrase closes the door, while the second cracks it open and invites possibility. Consider the case of Jamal, a factory worker who long dreamed of opening a small food truck. For years, he repeated the common tongue. People like me don't have that kind of money, or banks won't lend to someone in my situation. But then, after attending a seminar where the speaker challenged attendees to change their financial vocabulary, Jamal began asking new questions. Instead of saying he could not, he asked how he might. Within months, he discovered a local community program that offered microloans to entrepreneurs. With a loan of $8,000 and his own savings of $3,000, he bought a used truck, began selling meals, and within 2 years was earning more than his factory job ever paid. His story shows that freedom begins not with money itself, but with the language you use to approach it. This transformation is not easy. Every conversation around you may try to pull you back into the common tongue. Friends will warn you that investing is gambling, that wealth is only for the privileged, that you should be satisfied with whatever secure job you can find. They will repeat these warnings with such sincerity that they seem like wisdom, but they are really fear dressed up as advice. If you let their words dictate your own, you will never leave the vocabulary of scarcity. That is why the wealthy are careful about the voices they allow into their daily lives. They surround themselves with people who speak possibility, not limitation. They understand that language is contagious, and they guard their environment the way a scholar guards a library. Think about the way children learn to speak. They imitate what they hear. A child raised in a bilingual household will effortlessly grow fluent in 2 languages, not because they chose to, but because that was the air they breathed. Money works the same way. If you grow up hearing only fear, struggle, and resignation, those become your natural words. But if you expose yourself to new voices through books, mentors, communities, or even recordings, you begin to internalize a different set of phrases. Slowly, your financial language changes, and with it, your sense of what is possible. There is a powerful example in the life of Maria, who immigrated to the United States with little more than a suitcase and a few $100s. She worked as a cleaner in hotels and lived with 3 roommates in a small apartment. For years, she repeated the same words she had heard from everyone around her. Survive the week, pay the bills, send money home. Then she discovered a group at her local church where members met weekly to discuss business ideas and investment strategies. At first, she sat quietly, intimidated by the unfamiliar terms. But after months of listening, she began to pick up the new vocabulary. She started using words like equity, cash flow, and leverage. The more she spoke them, the more she believed them. Within 5 years, she had saved enough to purchase a small duplex, renting one unit while living in the other. What changed Maria's destiny was not a sudden windfall or stroke of luck. It was the deliberate act of breaking free from the common tongue and learning to speak differently about money. When you abandon the language of scarcity, you begin to see how much of it was rooted in fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of risk. Yet fear shrinks when exposed to new words. Say, "I can't," and fear grows larger. Say, "I will find a way," and fear retreats. Say, "I am learning," and fear has no place left to stand. Each phrase you choose is like a key on a piano, striking a note that changes the tone of your financial story. The rich understand this instinctively. They are fluent in speaking words of action, possibility, and strategy. And when they speak, their words create realities that others call luck, but are really the result of deliberate vocabulary. Breaking free from the common tongue is not about pretending money problems do not exist. It is about refusing to describe them in ways that keep you powerless. Debt can be acknowledged, but instead of calling it inescapable, you call it temporary. Income can be low, but instead of calling it all I'll ever have, you call it my starting point. Opportunities can be uncertain, but instead of saying too risky, you say worth evaluating. These subtle changes are the bridge between the life you inherited and the life you can build. Eventually, you notice something remarkable. The more you practice a new language about money, the more your reality begins to shift to match it. Decisions change because words changed first. Investments happen because possibilities were named. Risks are taken because potential was spoken aloud. You have broken free from the common tongue. And though you may never fully silence its echoes in the world around you, you have chosen not to let those echoes dictate your story. And in that choice, you have begun to rewrite the script of your financial life. Chapter 3. The Grammar of Investing. When you begin to hear the language of wealth, the words alone are not enough. A child may know words in a new tongue, but without grammar, the speech collapses into fragments. The same is true of money. You may know about saving, debt, profit, and risk, but until you understand the grammar that ties these words together, you cannot form coherent sentences in the language of wealth. For the rich, that grammar is investing. It is the structure that turns scattered opportunities into a fluent conversation with money, where every decision builds on the last, and meaning accumulates over time. Investing is often misunderstood because most people still try to explain it in the vocabulary of the common tongue. They describe it as gambling, a toss of the dice where luck determines the winner. But this is not how the wealthy see it. To them, investing is not chance, but grammar-consistent rules that govern how money multiplies. And just as grammar allows a language to expand into endless sentences, investing allows wealth to grow into forms that far exceed the original seed. The first rule of this grammar is time. Wealthy individuals understand that time is not a neutral backdrop, but the most powerful force in finance. Consider two friends, Anna and Michael. At the age of 22, Anna begins investing $300 each month into a simple index fund. She does this consistently for 10 years, contributing a total of $36,000 before stopping completely at age 32. Michael, on the other hand, spends his 20s without investing and only begins at age 32, committing $300 every month until he turns 62. By the time both reach 62, Anna, who invested for just a decade and then stopped, has nearly $600,000. Michael, who invested 3 times as much over 30 years, has only about $540,000. The difference is grammar. Anna learned to use time correctly, allowing compounding to act as a multiplier that no amount of late effort could match. The second rule is risk. To most people, risk is something to fear, but in the grammar of investing, risk is a modifier, like an adjective that changes the meaning of a sentence. It does not exist to be avoided entirely, but to be managed and directed. The wealthy understand that low risk often means low return, and high risk without preparation is reckless. But calculated risk, placed with knowledge and strategy, can transform an ordinary sum into extraordinary growth. Imagine placing $10,000 into a savings account, earning 2%. In 20 years, it becomes about $15,000. Place the same $10,000 into a balanced portfolio averaging 7% annually, and it grows to nearly $40,000. The difference lies not in luck, but in the willingness to accept the right degree of risk, to let the adjective sharpen the meaning of the financial sentence. The third rule is compounding. Compounding is the grammar's punctuation, the commas and periods that stretch sentences far beyond their initial length. It is the principle that money not only earns on the original sum, but on its own earnings, creating growth that accelerates over time. Albert Einstein reportedly called it the eighth wonder of the world, and for good reason. Without compounding, investing is static. With it, investing becomes exponential. To ignore compounding is like trying to write without punctuation. The message may exist, but it lacks power and clarity. To embrace it is to unleash the full eloquence of financial language. Consider the story of Raj, a young immigrant who arrived in Canada with little savings, but a determination to understand the grammar of investing. Working as a taxi driver, he managed to set aside $200 each month. He placed it consistently into mutual funds, reinvesting all dividends. At first, the growth seemed slow, almost invisible. After 5 years, he had about $15,000. Yet, he kept going. By his 15th year, the account had grown to nearly $70,000. By year 25, it surpassed $200,000. Raj had never earned a high salary, but by applying the grammar of investing time, risk, and compounding, he had written a long and flourishing financial sentence. The grammar of investing also teaches patience, because just as sentences unfold word by word, investments unfold year by year. Most failures in investing come not from poor choices, but from broken sentences. People who stop midway, pull out in fear, or jump constantly from one strategy to another. The wealthy understand that fluency requires letting the sentence finish. They allow investments to mature, to tell their full story. And in doing so, they communicate with money in a way that sounds foreign to those still speaking the broken dialect of quick wins and constant panic. To learn this grammar is to gain power. It is to recognize that every dollar you hold has the potential to become a phrase in a greater story, not if spent impulsively, but if placed carefully within the structure of time, risk, and compounding. You begin to see that investing is not optional, not something reserved for the privileged, but the very syntax of wealth itself. Without it, your financial story remains broken and stunted. With it, you begin to write sentences of freedom, paragraphs of stability, and eventually, a book of abundance that others will read as though it were written in another language entirely. The grammar of investing has another rule, one that is often overlooked but is as important as time, risk, and compounding. It is the rule of diversification, the way sentences are built not from a single word, repeated endlessly, but from many words arranged with balance and variation. The wealthy never rely on one stream of income, one stock, or one business idea. They scatter seeds across different soils, knowing that while some may fail to grow, others will flourish. To speak the language of wealth without diversification is like trying to speak a language using only nouns. You can form fragments, but you cannot express the full richness of meaning. Diversification is not about fear. It is about rhythm. When one investment slows, another quickens. When one market declines, another rises. The poor and middle class often keep their wealth concentrated in a single asset, usually their home or their paycheck. If either falters, their entire financial world collapses. The wealthy, however, spread their risk. They own businesses, stocks, bonds, real estate, sometimes even art or intellectual property. Their sentences flow more smoothly because they do not rely on a single word to carry the meaning. Consider the story of Luis, who worked for 2 decades as an engineer. He invested heavily in his company's stock, believing it to be safe since he trusted the business he helped build. For years, this strategy seemed wise, but when the company faced bankruptcy during a downturn, his retirement savings evaporated almost overnight. Contrast this with Karen, who worked at the same firm. Instead of concentrating her investments, she spread them across index funds, municipal bonds, and a rental property she purchased in her early 30s. When the company collapsed, her portfolio barely flinched. Her grammar was balanced, her financial sentence coherent, even when one word disappeared. Another essential element in the grammar of investing is reinvestment. It is not enough for money to generate returns. Those returns must be folded back into the sentence to extend its length and power. Many people treat dividends or profits as disposable income, spending them the moment they arrive. But the wealthy see reinvestment as punctuation that adds momentum. They know that by letting returns build upon themselves, the story accelerates, creating outcomes that seem impossible to those who constantly interrupt the flow by withdrawing too soon. Let us look at an example. Imagine you purchase shares in a fund that pays out $500 in annual dividends. If you spend those dividends, the growth of your investment remains slow. But if you reinvest them, those $500 purchase more shares, which in turn produce more dividends the next year. Over decades, the difference becomes staggering. A modest portfolio left untouched can double or even triple its final value simply through the discipline of reinvestment. This is why the wealthy often appear patient. They understand that every period of reinvestment is another sentence in the story, another line in the dialogue between time and money. There is also the rule of liquidity, the ability to access funds when needed without breaking the grammar of your investments. Wealthy individuals maintain cash reserves, not because they expect to use them constantly, but because liquidity gives them flexibility. It allows them to seize opportunities when others cannot, to buy assets at a discount during downturns, or to cover emergencies without derailing their larger financial structure. Without liquidity, even the best investments can become cages, trapping you when you most need freedom. Liquidity is like the spaces between words, silent, invisible, but essential for meaning. Take the case of Evelyn, a small business owner who poured every dollar into expanding her cafe. She believed she was investing wisely by constantly reinvesting profits into growth. But when an unexpected medical expense of $20,000 arose, she had no liquid assets. To cover the cost, she sold part of her business under unfavorable terms, losing long-term potential. Had she kept even a modest emergency fund, she could have preserved ownership and avoided financial strain. Her story illustrates how liquidity, though often unglamorous, is one of the quiet rules that keeps the grammar of investing intact. Over time, as you apply these rules, time, risk, compounding, diversification, reinvestment, liquidity, you begin to write financial sentences that extend into paragraphs and chapters. The wealthy do not achieve fluency overnight. They learn, they practice, they make mistakes, but they never abandon the grammar. Each investment is a word, each strategy a clause, each decade a page. And gradually, a narrative of stability and freedom emerges, a story that can weather recessions, job losses, or personal crises. What may seem extraordinary to an outsider is, for the wealthy, simply the result of speaking correctly. Others marvel at their apparent luck or genius, but it is no mystery. It is grammar. It is the steady application of rules that govern how money behaves. Rules available to anyone willing to study and practice. The difference is that most never learn the grammar, content to stumble through fragments in the common tongue of scarcity. But once you master it, you are no longer translating wealth from afar. You are speaking it directly, fluently, shaping your own sentences in the ongoing dialogue between effort, money, and time. Chapter 4. Accents of Power and Influence. Money speaks, but it never speaks alone. It always carries an accent, a subtle inflection that reveals not only what you have, but who you are and how you move in the world. The rich understand this better than anyone. For them, wealth is not measured solely in numbers, but in the power those numbers convey, in the influence they can wield, and in the networks they can build. While most people focus only on their bank accounts, the wealthy focus on the way their money amplifies their voice, the way it colors their sentences with authority that others cannot ignore. Influence is the hidden accent of money. Consider how differently a bank officer treats two clients who walk through the same door. One has a modest account balance and no assets. The other holds a portfolio of investments, owns property, and has a record of paying debts responsibly. The words they speak may be the same, requesting a loan, asking for terms, but the responses they receive differ. Money does not just purchase goods. It shapes perception, changing the weight of your voice in every room you enter. The wealthy are deeply aware of this. They know that their financial standing grants them credibility, but they also know that credibility is fragile if not reinforced by relationships. That is why they cultivate networks with deliberate care. They attend gatherings not only for pleasure but for opportunity. They invest in friendships that extend beyond the superficial, building circles where ideas, referrals, and deals flow freely. A wealthy individual knows that one introduction can be worth more than a decade of solitary effort. This is not because they are lucky, but because they have mastered the accent of influence, speaking with money in a way that others instinctively trust and respect. Take the story of Victor, who began as a modest entrepreneur selling furniture in a small town. His business grew steadily, but the true breakthrough came not from his products alone, but from his connections. He joined a local chamber of commerce where he volunteered to help organize events. Through these activities, he met a regional developer who later invited him into a joint venture for a commercial real estate project. Victor invested $50,000, a sum he could barely spare at the time, but the partnership yielded consistent annual profits of over $20,000. More importantly, it positioned him in a circle of developers, bankers, and city officials. His money was working, but so was his accent. The power of being seen as a man of resources and reliability. Power does not mean domination. It means presence. The wealthy carry themselves differently because they know they have options. Options are the true currency of influence. When you are not desperate for a single paycheck or a single client, you negotiate from strength. Your voice steadies. Your words land with greater authority. This confidence is not arrogance. It is the natural accent of financial security. It is what allows the wealthy to walk away from bad deals, to demand fair terms, and to attract partners who sense that steadiness. But there is another layer: reputation. The wealthy understand that influence grows not only from assets, but from the stories others tell about you. A reputation for integrity compounds like interest, opening doors you never even knew existed. Conversely, a reputation for dishonesty closes doors permanently, no matter how much money you have. In the world of wealth, your word is often worth more than your wallet. Deals are made on handshakes that rest on decades of trust. The accent of power, then, is shaped not only by numbers, but by character. Consider Eleanor, a philanthropist known for her meticulous honesty. In the early years of her career, she ran a small publishing business. Once, a shipment error delivered her an extra 5,000 books she had not paid for. Returning them would cost her money, and keeping them could have doubled her profits. She chose to return them. The supplier, surprised by her integrity, offered her preferential contracts for the next decade. Years later, when Eleanor began raising funds for a foundation, donors remembered her reputation. Millions flowed into her projects, not only because she had wealth, but because she spoke with the accent of trust. This is where the language of the rich truly diverges from the common tongue. For those trapped in scarcity, money is about survival, and survival often tempts people into short-term compromises. But the wealthy see beyond the immediate. They know that every action adds to or subtracts from their accent. Each decision either strengthens or weakens the tone with which they are heard in the world. And so they protect their reputation. With the same care, they protect their investments, understanding that both are forms of capital. The accent of influence also extends to how the wealthy give. Generosity, when genuine, magnifies their presence. Donations to schools, hospitals, or local causes are not merely tax deductions. They are statements, sentences spoken with clarity that say, "I am here, I am invested, I am part of this community." Such acts do not diminish wealth. They expand its resonance. People remember givers more than spenders. A luxury car might catch attention for a moment, but a scholarship fund speaks for generations. The rich know this, and so they use money to craft accents that echo long after their own voices fall silent. In this way, money ceases to be just a tool of private gain. It becomes a public language, one that shapes perceptions, builds bridges, and establishes authority. You begin to see that wealth without influence is fragile, but wealth with influence becomes enduring. The numbers in your account are important, yes, but the accent with which you speak about them, the credibility, the networks, the reputation determines whether those numbers multiply into lasting power or vanish like sand through your fingers. The accent of wealth does not only emerge in boardrooms or business partnerships, it appears in the smallest exchanges, in the way conversations shift the moment someone senses financial security. You have likely noticed this yourself. When a person who is struggling with debt offers advice, it is often met with polite nods, but little follow-through. When someone with visible success speaks, people lean in, pens ready, eager to write down every word. The content may not differ much, but the accent changes how the message is received. This is the unspoken advantage of influence. The same sentence carries greater weight when spoken with the authority of wealth. But influence is not born in a vacuum. The wealthy cultivate it intentionally, like tending to a garden. They understand that money gives them a platform, but it is their actions and relationships that determine whether that platform elevates them or collapses beneath them. A wealthy person who isolates themselves, hoarding resources and refusing to connect, finds their accent thin and fragile. Their wealth may buy them comfort, but it does not buy them community. By contrast, the individual who invests not only in markets, but in people, who takes time to mentor, to advise, to connect others, discovers that influence multiplies faster than money ever could. Consider the example of Harold, a lawyer who built a successful practice in his 40s. His income was substantial, and he could have easily withdrawn into a private life of luxury. Instead, he volunteered to teach financial literacy courses at a local community center. Over time, his generosity built him a reputation as a trusted advisor far beyond his legal clients. When he later launched a real estate venture, dozens of former students and community members lined up to invest with him, not because he had advertised aggressively, but because he had already established credibility. His wealth carried an accent of service, and that accent drew others to his projects naturally. The wealthy also understand that influence grows stronger when it is shared. Power hoarded shrinks, but power distributed expands. In many wealthy circles, you will hear the phrase, "A rising tide lifts all boats." This is not empty poetry, it is strategy. By helping others rise, the wealthy reinforce their own standing. A mentor who lifts a protege today may find that same protege opening doors for them decades later. An investor who supports a startup may one day reap rewards far beyond the initial capital, not only in money, but in loyalty and gratitude. Influence begets influence, and generosity is often the seed. Networks, too, are accents in themselves. You have likely heard the saying, "It's not what you know, it's who you know." The truth is more nuanced. What you know determines your capacity, but who you know determines your acceleration. The wealthy build networks, not by chasing every contact, but by curating circles of trust and reciprocity. They do not simply collect business cards at events. They cultivate deep relationships where value flows both ways. A wealthy person might introduce two contacts who can benefit one another, even when there is no immediate gain for themselves. That act alone adds richness to their accent, marking them as a connector, someone whose presence signals opportunity. There is an old story about a businessman named Samuel who attended an auction for a struggling manufacturing plant. Several competitors were present, each eager to secure the property at the lowest price. Instead of outbidding them, Samuel quietly approached two of the strongest contenders and proposed a partnership. Together, they purchased the plant, split the investment, and turned it around within 5 years. The move shocked those who thought only in terms of competition. Samuel's accent was not just wealth, but collaboration, and it gave him access to opportunities that would have been impossible alone. Influence, when spoken fluently, often sounds less like rivalry and more like harmony. The accent of power also extends into how the wealthy navigate adversity. When crisis strikes, most people panic, their language turning frantic and defensive. The wealthy, by contrast, often speak with calmness, not because they are immune to loss, but because their security gives them space to think clearly. This composure itself becomes influence. Imagine two leaders facing a financial downturn. One speaks in panic, cutting staff hastily and spreading fear. The other speaks steadily, acknowledging challenges, but outlining a clear strategy. Employees, partners, and investors gravitate toward the second, not necessarily because the strategy is better, but because the accent conveys stability. Power is not only about numbers. It is about the way those numbers allow you to steady your voice when others tremble. At its deepest level, the accent of wealth is about legacy. What do people say about you when you leave the room? What remains of your voice when you are no longer present to speak for yourself? The wealthy who endure beyond their own lifetimes are those who crafted accents rooted in contribution, integrity, and influence. Think of Andrew Carnegie, who built immense wealth in the steel industry but is remembered today less for his business than for the libraries he funded across America. His accent did not fade when his fortune passed on. It continued to echo in the learning and opportunities created for millions. In this light, you begin to see that wealth without influence is brittle, a hollow shell easily cracked by misfortune or isolation. But wealth with influence becomes durable, reinforced by trust, networks, reputation, and legacy. The accent of money is not something you can fake for long. It must be earned, sentence by sentence, action by action. And once it is established, it allows your words and your wealth to carry further than you could have imagined, reaching ears and hearts long after the numbers themselves have changed. Chapter 5. Dialects of Freedom. When you listen closely to the wealthy, you begin to notice something striking. They do not all speak in the same tone. Their words carry different rhythms, shaped by their choices and the way they design their lives. These are the dialects of freedom. Just as languages branch into dialects that reflect geography and culture, so too does the language of wealth branch into unique expressions of liberty. One person's wealth allows them to travel without constraint, while another's allows them to create without financial pressure, and yet another's gives them the ability to walk away from anything that does not align with their values. The money may be similar, but the freedom it buys is spoken differently. For most people, the word freedom is vague, an abstract idea. They say they want it, but they cannot define it. For the wealthy, freedom has concrete meaning. It shows up in their schedules, in their relationships, in the way they allocate time and energy. Consider Thomas, who built a chain of small grocery stores in the Midwest. By the time he turned 50, his net worth exceeded $20 million. He could have continued expanding, but instead, he chose a different dialect of freedom: time. He sold a portion of his holdings, invested conservatively, and spent his days coaching his daughter's soccer team, writing essays, and traveling with his wife. His freedom was not about having the most, but about reclaiming the hours of his life. He spoke a dialect where money was not a master but a servant, ensuring his days belonged to him. Another dialect is creative freedom. Wealth allows certain individuals to pursue passions without fear of financial ruin. Take Maya, a woman who worked in finance for 15 years, carefully saving and investing until she had accumulated enough passive income to cover her living expenses indefinitely. At 39, she left her corporate job to become a painter. Her friends worried she was wasting her talent for numbers, but she laughed and said, "Numbers gave me the chance to paint without fear." She did not need to sell a single canvas to survive. And yet her art began to sell precisely because it was not born of desperation. Money gave her the accent of authenticity, and her creative work flourished. Then there is geographic freedom, a dialect that has grown louder in recent decades. With wealth, people are not bound to a single place, nor to the economic conditions of their hometown. They can live where they feel most alive. Picture a couple, David and Lina, who after building a successful online business moved from a crowded city to a quiet village by the sea. Their friends back home could not understand why they left behind the buzz of urban life. But David and Lina were fluent in a different dialect, one where the sound of waves replaced the sound of traffic, and where the freedom to choose their environment mattered more than appearances. Their wealth was not simply numbers. It was the ability to say, "We will live where our souls breathe easiest." Each dialect of freedom requires a foundation, systems that generate income without constant labor. The poor and middle class often confuse ownership with freedom, believing that buying a home or a car signifies independence. But these often come with chains of debt and maintenance that erode liberty. The wealthy understand that true freedom emerges when money speaks for you. Rental properties, dividend-paying stocks, royalties, automated businesses. These are the voices that continue the dialogue, even when you are silent. To build such systems is to create a dialect where your time is no longer exchanged for every dollar you earn. One of the most vivid examples of this comes from the story of Alex, who once worked 80-hour weeks as a software consultant. He earned an impressive salary, but he was exhausted, barely seeing his family. At 35, he made a decision to redirect his energy. He spent 3 years aggressively saving and investing in rental properties. By the age of 38, his monthly rental income equaled his consulting salary. He quit the grind and began spending mornings with his children, afternoons exploring hobbies, and evenings mentoring younger entrepreneurs. His accent changed from one of exhaustion to one of choice. Freedom was not just the absence of work, it was the presence of options. You begin to see that wealth is not about speaking louder than others, but about speaking differently. While most people talk of survival, the wealthy talk of design. They ask not, "How will I get by this month?" but, "How shall I shape my life in the years ahead?" The dialects of freedom are many, but they all share one truth. Money is no longer the primary constraint. The constraint becomes imagination. What will you do when money no longer dictates every decision? What will your accent sound like when your voice is free from scarcity? This is the question the dialects of freedom whisper into your ear. And as you learn to listen, you realize that fluency in wealth is not about mimicking one accent, but about discovering your own. It is about designing a life where your money does not merely sustain you, but liberates you, giving you the freedom to write sentences in your own voice, unshackled from the grammar of survival and spoken in the dialect of your choosing. The beauty of wealth is that it does not dictate which dialect of freedom you must speak. It simply offers you the alphabet, the words you choose, the cadence you adopt, the emphasis you place. All of these belong to you. Some use wealth to escape obligations, others to deepen them. Some use it to retreat into quiet lives, others to project their voices into the world more forcefully. What matters is that you now have the option to choose. Without wealth, the dialect of your life is forced upon you. The dialect of working late hours because bills demand it. The dialect of living in places you did not choose. The dialect of saying no to opportunities because your wallet refuses. With wealth, the script becomes yours to write. One of the most powerful dialects is what might be called relational freedom. When money is scarce, relationships are often distorted by dependency. Marriages strain under financial tension. Friendships buckle under envy. Parents pass down anxieties to their children like heirlooms. But when financial stability is secured, Relationships breathe. Arguments that once erupted over unpaid bills dissolve. Parents can invest in their children's education not with fear, but with joy. Couples can make decisions based on values rather than desperation. The dialect of relational freedom allows conversations to be about love, growth, and shared purpose, instead of constant survival. There is the story of Roberto and Elena, a couple who struggled in their 20s, often fighting about expenses. They lived in a cramped apartment, their credit cards maxed, their future uncertain. But through steady discipline, paying off debts, saving diligently, investing in a small family business, they transformed their financial lives. By their 40s, they owned 2 properties, carried no debt, and enjoyed passive income streams. The tone of their marriage changed. They no longer fought about who bought what or whether they could afford a vacation. Instead, they spoke of where they wanted to travel next, how they wanted to raise their children, and what causes they would support. Money had not solved every problem, but it had removed the constant background noise of scarcity, giving their relationship a new dialect, one fluent in peace. Another dialect is vocational freedom, the ability to choose work not because it pays, but because it fulfills. Imagine waking each morning and asking not, "What must I do today?" but, "What do I want to build, create, or contribute?" This dialect is rare, but transformative. It turns careers into callings. Wealthy individuals often continue working long after they could retire, not because they need the income, but because they love the impact. Think of Warren Buffett, still investing in his 90s, not out of necessity, but because the game itself is his passion. Vocational freedom allows work to be redefined as play, contribution, or legacy, unchained from survival. Geographic freedom, too, expands in surprising ways. It is not only about moving to a beachside villa or a mountain retreat. It is about the ability to adapt when circumstances change. A wealthy family might decide to relocate for better schools, cleaner air, or safer communities. An entrepreneur might spend half the year in one country and half in another, choosing climates and cultures that nourish them. For most people, geography is fixed by income. For the wealthy, it is fluid, shaped by desire. This dialect is spoken not only in exotic locations, but in the simple ability to say, "We will live where we thrive, not where we are trapped." No is one redder. There is also generational freedom, a dialect that extends beyond your own life. It is the freedom to ensure your children and grandchildren inherit not the burdens of debt, but the opportunities of choice. This dialect is subtle because it does not always manifest in luxury. It often shows up in education, in the freedom of a child to pursue a career in music instead of settling for the nearest paycheck, or in the chance for a grandchild to start a business without the crushing weight of student loans. Generational freedom is a dialect that whispers across time, a language your descendants will speak even if they never hear your voice. Consider Angela, a teacher who lived modestly but invested carefully throughout her life. By the time she passed away in her 80s, she left behind a portfolio of nearly $2 million. Her grandchildren, who once expected to begin adulthood under the same financial strains their parents had endured, suddenly had the chance to graduate debt-free, to travel, to explore careers aligned with passion rather than pressure. Angela's voice continued speaking through them. Her dialect of freedom was not about lavish spending, but about planting seeds that grew into choices for those she loved most. Each dialect of freedom is shaped by personal values. Some people long for stillness, others for adventure, others for creation, others for service. Wealth is the tool that removes the walls, leaving the landscape open. What you build upon that landscape becomes your personal dialect, your unique expression of freedom. The key is to recognize that the dialect is chosen, not automatic. Without clarity, wealth can simply amplify old habits of fear or excess. But with intention, it can translate into a life that feels authentically yours. And so you find yourself at a crossroads. The common tongue of scarcity is behind you. The grammar of investing lies beneath you. And the accents of influence surround you. Now, with wealth growing, the question is no longer whether you can survive, but how you will live. Which dialect of freedom will you speak? The answer, whispered by your values and shouted by your actions, will define not only your days, but the echoes you leave behind. Chapter 6. Mastering the Language of Legacy. Every language has a point where it transcends conversation and becomes literature, where words written on the page outlive the speaker. In the same way, the language of wealth reaches its highest form, not when it buys comfort, not when it secures freedom, but when it creates legacy. Legacy is the continuation of your financial voice after you are gone, the echo that shapes lives and choices long beyond your own. To master the language of legacy is to understand that wealth is not only for the present, but also for the future. Not only for you, but for those who follow. Legacy begins with the recognition that money carries stories. When you pass wealth to others, you are not just transferring numbers. You are handing down the sentences you have written with your financial life. If you built your fortune with discipline, generosity, and vision, those values travel with the wealth. If you gathered it through secrecy, selfishness, or fear, those too leave their mark. This is why so many fortunes vanish within a generation, because money without meaning is a language without grammar. It dissolves into fragments that heirs cannot piece together. The rich who master legacy know that the message is as important as the money itself. Take the story of John D. Rockefeller, one of the wealthiest men of the 19th century. He did not only accumulate oil riches, he also established charitable foundations that shaped education, health, and science for over a century. His descendants did not merely inherit money, they inherited a framework for giving, a grammar of generosity that continued to influence how they used their resources. The legacy was not just in the numbers transferred, but in the values embedded. His voice still speaks today through institutions that bear his name. Contrast that with countless lottery winners who gain millions overnight but leave behind nothing enduring. Their money often disappears within a decade because it was never placed within a structure of meaning. Their heirs inherit wealth without wisdom, and the story ends in silence. Legacy requires more than accumulation. It requires translation. The wealth must be translated into purpose, into lessons, into systems that ensure the story continues after you are no longer there to narrate it. The wealthy who think in terms of legacy often establish trusts, foundations, or family businesses designed to endure. But beyond structures, they leave behind narratives. They tell their children how the money was made, what sacrifices were required, and what principles guided each decision. These stories become part of the inheritance. A trust fund without a story may lead to entitlement. A trust fund paired with a story leads to stewardship. Legacy is less about preserving wealth than about preserving the meaning of wealth. Consider Grace, a woman who grew up in poverty but became a successful real estate investor. When she died in her 70s, she left behind $12 million spread across properties and investments. But she also left her grandchildren a series of handwritten journals. In them, she described how she had lived on beans and rice for years, how she had studied property deeds at the county courthouse for free, how she had endured setbacks and losses before finding success. Her grandchildren did not just inherit her money, they inherited her resilience. The journals gave them the dialect of perseverance, ensuring that the fortune did not make them soft, but reminded them of the grit required to build it. Legacy also extends beyond family. The wealthy understand that their money can influence communities, nations, even the world. When you fund a scholarship, you are not just helping one student, you are shaping every life that student will touch. When you build a hospital wing, you are not just buying bricks, you are speaking health into the lives of countless strangers. Legacy is the amplification of your financial voice across time and space. It is the recognition that wealth, if spoken with intention, can echo endlessly. Yet legacy is not automatic. Many assume that simply leaving money behind is enough. But without clarity, wealth can become a curse. Families torn apart by inheritance battles, children corrupted by sudden riches, communities dependent on handouts rather than empowered by opportunity. All of these are examples of wealth spoken without care, without structure. To master the language of legacy is to think not only of what you will leave, but of how it will be received. And so the wealthy plan with precision. They write wills that reflect not just a vision, but vision. They create foundations with missions that outlive them. They record values in letters, videos, or traditions so that wealth carries a consistent message. They know that legacy is not about control, trying to dictate every choice after death, but about direction, offering a compass that points toward purpose long after their own footsteps have faded. This is the summit of financial fluency. You began by hearing the first whispers of wealth, then breaking free from the common tongue, then mastering the grammar of investing, then speaking with accents of power and influence, then discovering the dialects of freedom. But true mastery comes only when your wealth continues to speak after you are silent, when your story becomes larger than your lifetime. That is legacy, and it is the final dialect of the rich, the one that ensures their language never dies. Legacy is not only about what you leave, but about how you prepare others to receive it. A fortune given to unprepared hands often becomes a burden. A fortune given to trained hands becomes a tool. The wealthy who master the language of legacy know that their role is not just to accumulate, but to educate. They spend time teaching their children and heirs how money works, how it grows, and how it disappears if handled carelessly. They make sure the next generation can speak the language fluently, rather than merely inherit the vocabulary without knowing the grammar. One of the simplest yet most profound methods is the creation of rituals. Families who understand legacy often gather not only for holidays, but for financial discussions. They hold annual meetings where investments are reviewed, goals are set, and responsibilities are distributed. To outsiders, this may seem cold or transactional, but to them it is tradition, a way of passing down fluency like songs or recipes. Imagine a family that meets every summer to decide together which charitable projects they will support. The money given is important, but the true legacy is the conversation, the shaping of values that will guide children long after the elders are gone. There is a story about a woman named Teresa who built a chain of bakeries and retired with wealth exceeding $10 million. Instead of simply leaving the business to her 3 children, she began involving them in decision-making while she was still alive. She let them choose new locations, negotiate contracts, even make mistakes. By the time she passed, the children were not simply heirs, but seasoned entrepreneurs. The business grew even larger under their care, because the legacy they inherited was more than money. It was fluency. Teresa had taught them not just to hold wealth, but to converse with it, to use its language with confidence. Legacy also requires humility. Many wealthy individuals realize that their descendants may not need all that they have accumulated, and so they choose to direct part of their wealth outward. They fund libraries, scholarships, conservation efforts, or medical research. They understand that money spoken only within the family risks becoming insular, but money spoken into the wider world multiplies in meaning. Think of Alfred Nobel, whose fortune from explosives was transformed into the Nobel Prizes, a legacy that has recognized and encouraged excellence for more than a century. Nobel's wealth continues to speak, shaping the direction of science, literature, and peace across the globe. But legacy is not limited to billionaires or industrialists. Even modest fortunes can echo for generations if spoken wisely. Consider Daniel, a school teacher who never earned more than $50,000 in a year. Through careful saving and consistent investing, he accumulated nearly $1 million by the end of his life. Instead of leaving it all to his children, he divided part of it into college funds for his grandchildren and part into a scholarship for students in his hometown. His children and grandchildren remembered him not just as a man who left money, but as a man who valued education above all else. His legacy was modest in numbers compared to magnates, but vast in meaning for those who spoke his language after him. What makes legacy powerful is that it shapes identity. A child who grows up knowing they are part of a family that values enterprise, generosity, and resilience carries themselves differently. They see money not as a mysterious force, but as a language they already understand. They are less likely to squander it because they see themselves as stewards, not merely spenders. This identity is the true inheritance, the invisible accent that travels with them through life, guiding their decisions long after the numbers themselves are gone. Of course, legacy also carries responsibility. The wealthy must ask themselves difficult questions. Am I leaving behind clarity or confusion? Am I empowering or enabling? Am I shaping character or simply transferring cash? These questions matter because money is a powerful amplifier. If it falls into hands unprepared, it amplifies weakness and destroys. If it falls into hands prepared, it amplifies strength and creates. Mastering legacy is ensuring that the amplification serves life, not ruin. And here lies the quiet truth. Legacy is being written every day, long before wills are drafted or estates are divided. The way you speak about money at the dinner table, the choices you make when faced with hardship, the generosity you practice in small ways, all of these are sentences your loved ones are already hearing. Long before you leave them wealth, you are leaving them language. They are learning how to think, how to spend, how to give, how to dream. Your daily financial life is a manuscript that will outlive you. To master the language of legacy is to become intentional about that manuscript. It is to recognize that your voice will echo whether you want it to or not, and to shape that echo with care. It is to decide, here and now, what you want your wealth to say when you are no longer present to speak. Will it say, he hoarded, she consumed, they disappeared? Or will it say, they built, they gave, they inspired? The choice is yours, line by line, dollar by dollar, story by story. And so, the final lesson of wealth is not about accumulation, but continuation. The first whispers of money taught you that wealth speaks. The journey taught you that the rich speak another language. Now you see that the greatest fluency of all is when your wealth continues the conversation without you. When your voice becomes a chorus sung by generations and communities. When your story outlives your body and your language becomes legacy.